All right, everybody, we are back again for another episode of Life After Ball, talking about everything on how to plan for your life after retirement and going into this crazy thing of what we call the real world. As we talked about before, we don't even know what the real world is. I'm still trying to figure out what it is. And I guess, again, we got with us today Doherty and Tara are going to help me out. We talk about today how teams can help players plan out for retirement. My first question is, how much ownership falls on the teams when it comes to planning for these players' retirement? Because I mean, they use them for so many years. I wouldn't say use them. I mean, players are playing, but obviously they're part of the team. They're part of the organization. They're on these big contracts, and sometimes they finish their career before the contract is up. Injury happens, life happens, or the contract is up, and the team feels like they're too old, so they're going to move on to the next person, and somebody's thrown into retirement. People are now trying to figure out what to do. So how much of the ownership falls on the team to help these players, plan out for life after ball and everything that comes with it?
That could be said very short, a lot. I think they have a lot of responsibility because they're they should be responsible. They should also care about building a human being, which is not just in the period of them actually playing for the team. I know that they are not being paid, of course, for doing this job, but I still think that it should be in their interest to not just lead them down the cliff after the professional career, if you ask me. And also because they have a lot of staff already. So it should be within their interest to add a few things extra that could actually educate the player on themselves, what would be the right thing to do. Now we're looking into the last chapter of your career. Can we direct you in some direction? I think we would save a lot of life with that. So I would say a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think just under the guise of like duty of care, when you are stewarding athletes, like you want to make sure that they're in the best possible physical, mental, emotional health possible to play and play well. I mean, obviously performance of the team depends on health, well-being, and safety of the individual. By virtue of wanting to make sure that each of your, I guess, if you want to consider, I guess you're an asset. Really, you're an asset to the organization, however that sounds and feels, you're an asset. So protecting your asset means that you're investing heavily into the health and well-being of that athlete. And so just by virtue of that should be a number one priority of an organization, to make sure its players are healthy and well and can perform well. And because if they're not performing well, that's also realistically a cost to the organization, to keep lots of people on the injured list, and you don't want that. So even if people are not thinking and seeing people from a humanistic perspective, and they're just thinking of it as a dollars and cents perspective, you have to look after your assets. So that should naturally set up the athlete for either they're going to be a healthy trade for the organization. I'm seeing this from a dollars and cents perspective. I know from a humanistic perspective, I have a very different view, but let's just talk about it from a business perspective. They're setting up a healthy trade, or they're setting them up for a healthy retirement where they're speaking well of the organization. Even if you're just looking at it from a purely business perspective, that should be a responsibility. Now, humanly, as we all know, we care about, that should be an expectation. That should not be something that we should be thinking is a nice to. That should be an absolute expectation from a humanistic perspective. You've got to care for these people. You've got to let them, let them retire and have a healthy, productive career afterwards, and potentially give back to the organization if they've had a good experience. So I think it goes without saying, no matter what angle you look at.
How many teams have you guys seen or heard of that have actually help players, develop this strategy for after the football? And how important is it that they actually do this? Because you guys talk about, the business and being an asset and like just the human side of things, caring about people afterwards. I can speak about it from my perspective on like talking great about other teams or that I've played with, is that like, I don't really think I've ever had a team that actually talked to me about, what I'm going to do after football. Now, I've had a lot of teams I can talk great about, like that was a great organization to be a part of, to play for, coaches were great. Management was awesome, but I can't ever think of a team that's actually talked to me about like, hey, like, what is your plan like when this doesn't work out? Like if you get injured and the career ends, or if you have a long career and then you want to hang it up, like, what are you going to do afterwards? I don't think there's ever been a team that's talked to me about it and actually thought about that, because like, how do we put this into them, like into these teams, and like tell them like, hey, this is another huge part that could actually help your organization grow and help bring in even better players and keep guys around and having them talk great about your organization. Because I think that's another huge part. Like you talk about, if you look at like some of the teams that aren't great, like even in the NFL, right? We talk about the Giants, you're talking about the Jaguars, you talk about, some of the teams that went three and the Titans, teams that like have first round draft picks and all that stuff. Like how many of these teams are the players actually talking well about when they're leaving there? How many players are like when they retire from there, like, hey, like I would definitely want to be a part of like what they have going on afterwards, or like want to invest back into the team. I don't think like I don't know. For myself, I know like teams I played for in Europe, like I wouldn't just because I mean there's not many that have helped me. Like yes, they helped me see the world and when I was in Europe, but outside of that, I don't think anyone ever kind of helped me set up a job outside of it. No one helped me set up my own business or even talk to me about like career opportunities for staying. And then they try to nickel and dime you for like coming into a coaching position because they say that, well, you're not playing, so you're not that huge of an asset, but you're still an asset because you're a coach now. So now you're developing the next ones to come through. And like, now you're also an asset of American coming to Europe. Like now we're talking about other Americans that want to come over. They're going to ask us first, the other Americans that have been there, if it's a good place to come to. And for myself, I cannot lie to these other Americans coming over, like about where you should and shouldn't go. And that's just how I feel about it. So how can these teams set up a strategy and help these players out?
Well, to answer your first questions, how many teams have we heard from that has actually had that experience? I mean, I probably haven't had as many retired footballs as you have had, Tara, in specific American football. Within that category of any of those retired football players, I haven't heard not a single one mentioning anything. And I think it goes with a lot of the thing that I see as a European when I look at American football, where I see some gaps in what I think is a missing piece in the whole football industry, is that it's very short-sighted. So that means, from what my experience, even when you get a new athlete into the team, it's like we only look at this year. Everything is so short-sighted. Whereas if you compare it with European soccer, for instance, they have a building process. They actually buy an athlete where they can see potential, and then they match in what will this individual need for him to grow in the right direction, not just technically, but also mentally and also physically. So I feel like there's a lot of the things which is very short-sighted. And when the season ends, it's just, okay, thank you, goodbye. That was it. Thank you for this season. And we're not even planning for the next season because a lot of new players is going to come in anyway. I think part of that culture is probably also to do with, so you might be getting into the last years, or even if you get injured and you're not going to be able to play anymore. It's like, what I feel like the culture around football is that it's so short-sighted even for that. So we just have you as an asset for as long as you can. Whenever you're not available, we have somebody else. So I feel like that's a big problem in the whole American football. And I'm not really aware about how it's working in Europe in terms of American football, but I would imagine that we just adapt and then copy everything else. So I would even say that it's on American soil responsibility to go in front of that, because that is actually where the culture should be built, if you ask me, for sure.
Agree with everything you're saying there. I would say my experiences are in Canada and some in the United States. So I know of, let's say, chaplaincies within the CFL that are like talking to guys about, sort of like what's your life look like, family, how you set yourself up, transitioning that way. I've also had like really blessed experiences just personally in terms of family with a really great medical staff that did sort of at the very least an exit medical exam of players when they retired. So looked at knees, looked at backs, looked at full sort of health assessments to see where they were at so that they could transition healthily, and took responsibility for, I guess, the cost, the medical costs, the physical costs of the game on that athlete, knee replacement, hips, any sort of other systemic issues that would have been happening from playing under a lot of duress and stress. Like obviously professional football is an extremely stressful sport on the body and physiologically and all aspects of physical preparedness. So there have been some really good cases of really tight medical staff doing sort of an exit plan, an exit assessment and recommendations, and a transition plan medically into the community to help players so that they are like, okay, so because ideally Ideally, we're speaking optimally. Like I said, even if we're just talking from a business asset perspective and not, sort of dehumanizing it, you're an asset that needs to be protected. So your body needs to be functioning well. You need to be healthy well. And there's a case for, you've got to steward that really, really well. And also when an athlete retires, if they retire in shambles, with a whole bunch of, whether it's just, physical ailments, broken stuff and unhealed or mistreated knees or backs or things like that, or worse, sort of autoimmune issues or things like that from performing under chronic stress, whether they care about their reputations or not, there's going to be hey, I was extremely mismanaged. I left with a very poorly managed concussion. I left with a very poorly managed fill in the blank. So I know more and more medical staff are trying within their scope of practice and their finances to try to manage that better and make sure they have a safe transition plan. I would say that should be sacrosanct. Like there should be no case where that isn't the case, because for however way you shake it down, that athlete is not going to do well in the real world after. And at the very least, they may, yap about it, say this team completely mismanaged X, Y, or Z for me. So I think that's got to be absolutely without question. That's just simple duty of care as a professional working in sport, as in the job that I do. I have a duty of care, responsibility, a code of ethics where I have to make sure that every athlete in my care has everything they possibly need to A, be successful, but B, manage the things that are not causing them to be successful in that time. So I think that if we have to talk about that, something's very wrong, in my view. If we have to talk about this and we have to actually question that that's a thing, in my view, there's something significantly wrong with the system. In terms of career planning and things like that, like there are in our national team system in Canada, we do have, within something called the Canadian Sport Institutes, with dealing with the national teams, there is a branch that's helping athletes prepare for life after national team sport. That's not paid sport, but school, career training, sort of helping them figure out how they can continue to do things to further their other options for career outside of their sport. They're unpaid in on national teams. It's a little bit different. So they need a source of income often alongside of their sport. So there's intentionality there to make sure they can still go to school, or how they manage their load, or opportunities to put them in jobs so they can leverage, leadership. There's all sorts of different types of things. I think that should definitely be something that should happen in pro sports as well. A lot of people have the idea, though, you make so much money as athletes, like why would you need us? Well, at the very least, maybe teach you to invest your money wisely and not spend it all during your career. Like I'm not sure, but I think that's there's definitely a place for that piece of it. I'm not sure. What do you think?
So I agree with everything you guys are saying. And Tara brought up a great point, is that like every year there's thousands, just talking about the NFL side of things, there's thousands of guys that are trying to make it in, right? When you look at the statistics of it, right? Each team, there's 32 teams. Each team has 53 active players. Then they have about 11 players on the practice squad. But then on top of that, like you've got kids that are coming out every year from college, which is thousands, trying to make it into the NFL. So then positions are trying to get filled. So then my biggest question would be is like, shouldn't this even trickle down even further to the college sector? Because a lot of these guys aren't going to make it, right? That's just the brutal truth. Like, even if I think about back to my start into the NFL, right? Like when I was going into the league, like I went into rookie minicamp as a tryout player. I wasn't drafted, wasn't an undrafted free agent, had no contract. Go into rookie minicamp and there's 90 players, right? So there's 7 or 8 guys that were drafted, about 15 guys that were undrafted free agents, and then you got about 65 other guys that are on tryout basis. And that's within a 3-day span. And within that 65 players, only 5 of us at the end of those 3 days were assigned to a contract, right? And so then you got 60 other guys now that are left to try to figure out what is the next thing. And on top of that, like, so us 5 guys that are assigned, like now we just go into the system of like, okay, we don't get any signing bonus or anything like that. We're just kind of like, we're depending on the contract that we get and hopefully making it to the active or the practice squad to actually start making money, right? Because we don't see any money, because a lot of people think once you sign the contract, you get money. So to be honest, all the way through rookie minicamp, OTAs, I made $1,000 a week just because that was like our expenses that were paid for. So they put us in a hotel. Obviously, we had food, all our gear is paid for and all that stuff. But I'm from Jacksonville, so I stayed in the hotel too. But that was a whole different story. But then that whole, you've got a month gap between, OTAs going into training camp, right? Where you're not paid at all, right? So if you didn't get a signing bonus, there is no money in there, right? Then you go into training camp and then you're back to getting paid $1,000 a week, right? To where you're still living in a hotel, you're practicing 2 days a week, right? You're flying out to games and all that stuff. And then you're still not getting any of your contracts. So my contract was worth $400,000, but I still never saw a dime of that. Right. So I played in 3 preseason games, just to clarify that for everybody, because I know people question how long I played. I played 3 preseason games. At the end of the 3rd preseason game, on Monday, I got called into the office and got cut. So my contract was now voided. Right. So any of that money that I was supposed to earn, I never got. So you don't see a game check until you actually play in the game or you're on the practice squad. So now I'm at square zero. Now I could have saved the money up that I had from that I was getting, but I'm in my hometown. I want to party. I want to have fun because I'm a young kid. I'm 23 years old, right? So I know everything going on. I know everybody, right? Players on the team, all the rookies and stuff are asking me where to go out to and everything. So I'm like, hey guys, I got no spots to go to. So my money was gone. So I come out of that with zero. And yes, there's player personnel that helps us kind of while we're in, but the player personnel only kind of helps us set us up with housing, help us like where we can get discounts on food, where we can get discounts on furniture. In different places, like if you want to get a car and everything like that, but they don't talk to you about what's afterwards. So my biggest question for you guys, if we play the role of an owner or a GM, what would y'all say that the first thing you need to come in and do as an owner when these players first come in, not just like when they're getting ready to retire, but how do you help them? Because none of us want to talk about like that football is going to end, and the NFL stands for not for long, right? Nobody makes it that long. There's very few cases that people make it to that 3rd, 4th contract. Now guys do make it and they get a big contract when they get to that 2nd one, but majority of it isn't that long, right? So if you're an owner, if you're a GM, one, how do you talk to these players when they first come in? And also, how do you trickle this down to the college level to let guys know, like, hey, like, how do you set up, Chris, we don't have time. Like when we think about like, okay, now the guys are getting NIL deals, right? They're getting paid while they're in college, so it's a little bit of money. But is there a financial advisor coming in, talking to them about where to invest at, where to put their money at? How do you say no to the people that have helped raise you? Because you got mom, dad, cousins, brother, sister asking you for money now because you're making a big amount of money. How do you tell people to say no or give them a certain allowance and like, hey, that's it. Like the rest of the money is for me, and where do I use that? And then when they get to the NFL, if they do make it, like how to invest that stuff so you have stuff for afterwards. Because like you said, a lot of people think like we earn a lot of money because we're professional athletes, but that money goes by quick because now, as we all know, like when you switch, like that switch from being broke to actually like making real money, now you also want to upgrade your lifestyle, right? So you want to live in a different tax bracket and you want to move a different way. Instead of driving your Corolla, now you want to drive a Lamborghini, right? Instead of having just a good old Under Armour backpack, now you want to have a Louis Vuitton, right? Instead of just showing up in your team gear, now I want to show up with a stylist. But then there's life afterwards. So what if you guys were GMs or owners? How would you guys help these guys come in with a plan and from day one?
I think it's super interesting because I heard a podcast the other day, which I'm following a woman. I know it's, again, I'm not trying to take it away from American football, but that was actually due to a lot of very young soccer players in Europe that are actually being brought into the academies from the age of 6, 7, 8. And this mom, she was having a boy that was 10 years old and already making millions. She's like, wait, this is just too soon. Where do we go? And she was like so frustrated because there was nobody to go to in the club. And if you would think that the European soccer clubs have been used to this academy thing for so many years, they should have provided something by now. But apparently there wasn't. This is in the Premier League. So she has actually established a help fund for parents to support their kids with that specific problem. Because what do you do if you come from like the poor neighborhood in the poor end of England, for instance, and you all of a sudden you have a lot of money? Of course, you wanna achieve those things or even get access to the things you've always been looking at other people having. So it's understandable, and it's not natural for any human being actually to go from 0 to 100 in the matter of no time. So of course, it's something that I would definitely also, if I was a GM in a football club, I would say counseling the individual about teaching them the part about finance so they can even last? How do you invest, for instance? Not that I'm an expert on investment, but to at least have somebody that could guide these kids into what does it mean to be in this position, even managing the celebrity. That's also a thing. Like, how do you all of a sudden, you think you aspire to become so famous because all of a sudden you have free access, you have all these perks with it, but you certainly also have a lot of things that most athletes, they definitely do not like about it as well, and they're not prepared for that. So when Tara and I are so obsessed about what is also within the performance, so what does that also do to your performance? I think from that stage, the general manager or whoever they have on the staff should have that in mind, because it will affect the performance big time. If this individual makes it, makes money, makes the popularity, makes all the media attention, that will affect your sleep, that will affect your self-criticism, that will affect so much on your performance, and not to talk about the cortisol levels and all that. So I think there's a lot of things that should, like you said, have been going on even in the college level. Maybe even in college, prepare them for, actually there's so little percentage not making this. But I do again come back to the idea that your upcoming president is so fussed about the American dream. That is so American, and I completely understand. That is what we are grinding for. We really want to struggle to achieve and accomplish this big dream of ours. So there's nothing wrong with that. But I think within that, you also have to prepare people that not everybody gets to that American dream. So I think there's a lot of really interesting thing as well, and I think it's really interesting that you bring up that early phase, because I watched the Netflix NIL thing from the LSU the other, like, recently, and it was just so interesting to see that big thing. And for me, sitting on the outside watching how unnatural it is for teenage kids to be under so much pressure in school, and all of a sudden they're managing a business full time with that pressure, and all of a sudden everybody have like the green card to criticize you, and say things everywhere on the social media. So there's so much pressure on these poor kids. So I think there's a lot of things to consider in that, for sure.
Well, I couldn't agree more with what you said. Like, I've actually, in the preparation I've helped with athletes do from all aspects of physiological readiness, strength conditioning, all that stuff. Like, one of the biggest things I prepare people that are trying to get under a national team for or a pro team is those other pieces, because honestly, no one understands the physiological cost of that. Like, once you spend so much time as an aspiring athlete, you work so much on all. I mean, you can speak to yourself with your own experiences, Coop, with this, like how much time you spend getting so physically pristine so that you can make it. By the time you get to the NFL or wherever you're going, NHL or ever any sort of pro sport or upper echelon sort of sport experience that you have, that stuff almost becomes secondary. Like, it's expected that you know how to train. It's expected you know how to take care of that stuff. You would expect you have the best staff at there, like the S&Cs and whatever, hopefully helping you, or physiologists, performance type based coaches that are helping you stay there. Like, that is an expectation, but oftentimes that's secondary to all the other stuff you have to navigate, which is also what we talk about is the hardest thing to get out of when you retire, is like, suddenly I'm a no one. Suddenly I don't know what to do with my money. Suddenly I don't know what I'm supposed to deal with this crazy body that's gone through such stress for so long. I don't even know what to deal with it. So the preparation has to come. I start preparing athletes early for what that feels like and that cost. And so we've got to actually train to be able to handle that other piece, because that's a whole other level of, I call it, training. It comes with another. I actually said, because I'm where I am right now with a big group of athletes right now. She said that when you get to this level of, this sport, they happen to be swimmers behind me, managing the life around that is a big part. Like, you actually, I liken it to, you've done another 2 to 3 workouts a week, just physiologically dealing with the celebrity, the pressure, the managing all the different people around you, the family dynamics, the popularity, the pressure to perform or stay on top. How do you perform, come from behind? How do you stay ahead? Like, there's so many different pressures that you have to account for that cost. So if somebody knows what they're doing from a sports science perspective or anything else, they've got to actually factor that into the load calculation. Because the load calculation, we talk about load calculations, load calculation is different at pro level. And it comes with a certain physiological cost you got to plan for. So again, back to what I said earlier, huge responsibility should lie on people that are preparing the athlete to get to that place. Because, okay, so now when you get there, how are you supposed to train? Because now you got all these other things. You got appearances, you've got all these people in your face. You suddenly don't have to train. You have no time for recovery. So how do you recover differently? And you've got to completely adjust the training to be able to train to stay at that level of performance and manage that. So if no one's talked that, people are going to show up in the NFL and blow up in 6 months. They're going to blow up. And you see that. You see people injured like crazy, sick like crazy, all that stuff. So in my view, there needs to be, which is something that I've done for years, is a concerted load plan, a load strategy, and how you're going to so you've got to almost train to handle that. And then when you get there, you know that you can maintain your physiological readiness by doing less of this, more of that. And you've got to come up with a full strategy or you're never going to last. And I don't know who helped you with that, Coop. I don't know, but it's like you could probably speak to the shock of like, oh my gosh, like I used to be able to spend so much time on the track. I used to be able to do this much time in the weight room. Now I don't have this time. My body's falling apart. Then you start cutting corners. People are taking crazy supplements. People are, have an herbalist and a acupuncturist and they started having this sort of like just to basically show up on the field. So I'm saying it's a massive part of the strategy. It's a hugely missed opportunity. It's something that I think is a call to action. A gap that, maybe we fill it. Maybe that's what we do. The three of us, let's have a business. Let's do it.
Yeah, I can honestly say nobody really helped me with the strategy of things. And I can honestly say a lot of ownership falls on myself too for not going out. Because obviously there's the NFLPA, CFLPA, right? There's those guys out there, but it also almost, when you're at the level that I was at when I came into the NFL, it's almost like being a walk-on into college. When you're an undrafted free agent, you're a trial player, you feel like you're now way bottom of the totem pole to where like the guys that were drafted and they got their signing bonus and everything, like they come first priority, right? Then you're undrafted free agents, and obviously you have the veterans in there and everything like that. Like that's more the priority, that like you're kind of just a guy there that's just a body for practices and whatnot. And then also on top of that, like me managing everything with being in Jacksonville, right? Like Jacksonville's my hometown. I went to play for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I make the team, but then like a lot of my friends are still there. And like people that I probably didn't talk to, people I talked to all throughout college, but there's also people that I never had talked to since high school, right? That are now hitting me up and contacting me. My family's there and all that stuff. And it's like the balance of it all just, and then also on myself, like I just felt like, I signed the contract, like a huge like weight kind of felt like I lifted off my shoulders, that like I made it, in the sense that like I just let off the gas, because I was like, man, I've worked so hard to get to this point that like, man, I just want to enjoy this little bit of what I've gotten, to the point where it also hurt me because I didn't study the playbook a lot. I was cutting corners, like you said, for workouts and whatnot. I did any less, but I didn't do as many as I used to do. I didn't work as hard as I used to when I went to the gym, because I was just tired. I was over it. Like I felt like, okay, I've gotten to this point, like, okay, I'm a hometown kid. They're most likely going to keep me on the team, not realizing that like this is still a huge business, and nobody besides my dad or maybe a couple other people that have been in the position I was in try to talk to me. And at that point, I'm 23. I'm like, I'm not trying to hear what you guys are trying to say, because like, don't worry, guys, I've got this figured out. So there's that hard part for a lot of guys that are like 23, 24 going into the league, that like, hey, don't worry, I've got it figured out. I've done whatever I've done to get to this point, like it's going to continue to work for me. And I think that's the hardest part with talking to a lot of the younger guys, is that we don't have it figured out. Even at 32, I can tell people that I still don't have it figured out. Even when it came to negotiating my contracts going over to Europe, like I did it my first year, and it was super simple. So I thought everything was like that afterwards. But no, there's still pieces in there that you got to figure out. Like stuff you got to negotiate with housing, with car, with food, with how much you want to get paid, whether you want to get paid bi-weekly, whether you want to get paid monthly, whether you want to get paid in cash, you want to get put in your bank account. Like, what do you want it to be? Euros? You want it to be USD? You want it to be Danish kroner, Swedish kroner, Polish zloty, whatever it may be. Like, there's so many things that go into it that we missed on, that we didn't have a strategy. And then we also talk about training. Like, training wasn't even like a thing talked about in Europe. Like when it came to a strength and conditioning coach, like not until the ELF came around, most teams didn't have a strength and conditioning coach. when you're an American, you come over there, you better have it figured out. You're probably following the programs that you did, whether you were in NFL, you were in Canada, or you were in college, right? You're following that same old stuff. Or like a guy like myself that studied and got my CSCS, okay, I knew things. But if you were a guy that didn't know that, like there was nobody there to help you. You went to the local gym, you went to SATs, right? You talking to a personal trainer. Most of the time, that guy had never played the sport that you're trying to play, or just got a personal training certification and was trying to continue on. So I think that's another huge part that, Europe is still trying to figure out. Now, the ELF is doing a good job with having a strength and conditioning coach, but then there's also the aspect of a physical therapist, right? Like when people do get injured, most of the time when I got injured in Europe, it was fix it on your own, or you go to a physical therapist that's most of the time just trying to get you to be able to function as a normal human being, which isn't the sport that we play. That's not what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to get back on the field and perform at a high level. And in America, it's how quickly can we get you back on the field, right? So sometimes there's corners skipped on that too. So that I think there's so many pieces, and then you talk about retirement, like Terry, you talk about some of these medical teams doing the exit exams on stuff. I never had that. And I can tell you for sure, when I got cut from the NFL, it was just like, good luck, find your way. In Canada, like I didn't even make, and then to be fully transparent, I didn't even make it across the border to get to Canada. When I signed my contract with Calgary, I went down to rookie minicamp, or went down to minicamp in Florida, got cut. See you later. Montreal, same thing, got cut. See you later. So I never even made it to the point where I was in the facilities or anything like that. And then it's just like, all right, figure it out from there. And we think we know how to, but there is no guidance for us. And then that's the point where we come to like, okay, well, we've been burned by so many of these teams that don't really, like you said, don't see us as an asset if we're not playing, but we're also still human beings trying to figure this thing out. Yeah, the hard part is just knowing where to start at with, like you said, Tara, or maybe we start something that we do come in and help these teams like figure out like how to set up a strategy for this. I think that's a huge part about these talks is like, how can we set up a strategy and a plan to come in and start early, not wait until their last year on their contract. And being a young guy, I know for myself at 23, if you approach me about like, what are you going to do after football? I'll be like, hey, like I'm playing football for 10 years. Like, don't worry about it. Like, I'll have money and like, I'll figure it out then. But there also is a huge part that like, it could happen sooner than later.
Well, planning for performance. Sorry, Johnny, go ahead.
No.
I was going to say planning for performance. Like if people are actually dialed into this and they're doing the yearly training plan, a proper yearly training plan to assess, which is about physiological readiness and peaking on time. You have to assess all these other variables. So I know people that can do it and do it well, and run courses on this to teach it. And so it is actually something that people should be like, okay, let's look at what's going on. So it's all about mitigation of stress hormone and performing on time and making sure you peak at this right time. That it should be considered. That is basic performance science 101. That's what I've grown up learning. And it continues to shock me that isn't something that's considered at the upper echelon of sport. It's like sort of, in some cases, it's like pretty ramshackle. I've seen some development teams that are a lot more dialed in than at the upper levels. And I don't know why that is, but I would say that it's a call to action. I've also, know some people in Canada that have lived through a couple Olympic cycles, have been Olympic athletes, and they're trying to. I've been really encouraging them as alumni that have figured out largely by crashing and burning. Let's be honest, they crash and burn when they retire. They didn't know what to do. They were, almost living hand to mouth at a few times in some pretty dark stages, and had to dig and grind and try to figure it out on their own, who managed to survive and get through it and raise families and be successful, but it not without a heck of a lot of road rash along the way, to come in and start something and mentor, like a mentorship group. It's something that you can connect with, either connected directly with the sport. So if the football, it's football athletes, if it's whatever it is, to sort of be able to be a point of contact immediately. Okay, you're going to end up on this team, and that can fall to the alumni associations, or that can fall to like something that is maybe there's a minor fee for service or fee for service for people that have done it, that include part like a support team of some sort, which partly alumni that have lived it because they have street cred and they can speak the language and they know they can say the things that maybe a doctor wouldn't say, or a physiologist wouldn't say, like, because they've lived it. So there's the real truth tellers of the whole situation, like, it sucks, don't live there, don't talk to that person, don't do this. Like, it gives you the hard facts. And then they create a resource bank, a toolkit. Essentially, it's a performance toolkit is what I call it, is like, all right, so when you get to this level, you're going to need to have access to this person, that person. This is what it's going to look like. This is maybe not the place you want to live because they'll gouge you. Stay away from those people. Ideally, some people have agents that help them with that, but that's a cost too. To hire an agent, that's a cost. And who do you know? Can you trust them? So I'm saying that this shouldn't be a conversation we're having, because it should be in my view, a given. But if it's not a given, that's an opportunity. And I think that that's a call to action. And at the very least, to your earlier question, Coop, like, how much responsibility should a GM have? At least if they're talking to you in the stages of having those conversations, like, hey, we're interested in you. If you want to be a part of our organization, be successful, and we see something in you, then here are some resources that you want to tap into quickly to help figure yourselves out. So you don't blow your wad of cash day one and suddenly you're living at McDonald's because that's all you can afford. And now you're going to perform like crap, or you're sleeping in the back of your van. I've met athletes that it's literally gotten that bad until they make it. That can't be helpful. That they're taking chances they shouldn't be taking. So I would say that that's a call to action. And I can't even believe, like, you're talking about 10-year-olds, Dorothy, like 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds having to deal with some of these things. Like, that's ludicrous.
Yeah, but I think in specifically in that sense, actually their agents do all these things. They advise them on finances, they advise them on all sorts of things. So they have a lot more responsibility, but because I think you have to have an agent when you're a soccer player, in at least in the European football. So I mean soccer. So they have, it's a little bit different. But I also do think that it's a little bit odd that the American football, they actually don't take some educational learning from other sports that have done this for ages, in terms of building athletes, taking them in as a young athletes. How can we help them keep thriving, keep being successful, and adapting this new lifestyle, which professional life is. So I think there's a lot of things that could be adapted, which should be long time ago. But what would you, Coop? I'm a little bit curious. What would you have now that you are on the other side and you can look back from your striving to get there, and so many attempts for actually making it and then semi-making it. If you look back now, where in that process would you have thought by looking back that it would have been the most helpful insight you could have?
Yeah.
The guidance.
I think it would have started early on from my college senior year. Having a strategy of what is not necessarily plan B, but like what happens when like this all is over. Not that like, and what are the options that you have? Like, even if you come out with a college degree or you don't come out with a college degree, what is it that you like are passionate about? Like, what do you like to do outside of football? Like for me, it was going fishing and going to the gym and that type of stuff. Going to the beach, traveling. Like that was what I was passionate about. But how do you turn that into a career? Like, how does that help you later on? Like, I know I got an opportunity when I got out of the NFL, and in the short time that I was in between NFL and Canada, I was working with my agent, and I was helping players, find sponsorships, working with companies and stuff. And that was really enjoyable for me because it felt like I was helping the athlete not only on like who they are as a player, but who they are as a person, like getting them to companies that same vision that they had. So that was like really, really fun for me. And then I think the next part of it would have been, what can you do with all the stuff that you've built up through all these years of playing? Like we talked about earlier on, like what is that passion you have to hustle, to grind, and the discipline you have to show up each and every day to the workouts, to practice. How can you use that to your best benefit for your next chapter? Because it is for sure that football ends, and like there's so many things that I thought I would want to do. Like there's a chance that I wanted to go into broadcasting. There's a chance that I wanted to start my own company, which I did when I was in Europe, but I had no clue what I was doing. Right? I was flying by the seat of my pants, and I was just like, hey, this is what I got to do. I had no clue how to do taxes, how to set up an LLC, all this stuff. I just went online and just did it. Right? And I didn't know if I was doing it right. I was just doing it. Right. And then also like on the flip side of things, like I know so many times when I came over to Europe, I wanted to stay but there was nobody that would help me figure out how to stay. Like, what do I need to do to be able to set up a visa on my own so I don't have to like depend on the team and like worry about their payment? Like, how do I set up a company that allows me to stay and be able to work? Like, how do I get in with another company and be able to work there even though I'm an American? So I think there's a lot of like missing pieces in there that are like, we just want help. We just want the guidance, and we just want to know how to like eventually we want to know how to do things on our own, because when we're in college, I think a lot of things are done for us. Like I can honestly tell you, I would just tell my advisor what classes I want to take and what times I want to take them, and that she would sign up for me. And then when we had to pick up our books, they were just in our lockers for us. Right? Nowadays, they just have an iPad and everything when it comes to class.
Yeah.
Realistically, like we didn't have to do anything. And then when I got into the league, it was like, hey, all you have to do is show up at the facility, right? You've got Gatorade, you've got your snack bars, you got your food, your gear, all your stuff is here. And then there's a bus from the hotel to the field, and it takes you from the field back to the hotel. So, right, like everything is already planned out for us. There's also a part of like when we get out, oh shoot, now everything is planned on us. Like now we had to like figure out how to do that. And some of us are trying to figure that out as we're in, because we kind of get the idea that this isn't going to last for forever. So while I was in, I was trying to figure these pieces out, but it felt like nobody wanted to give me the guidance or the answers, because it was just like, hey, you're here to play. Like you just had to play well, and everything else will fall into place. But then when the season was over, it was like, I got deported from Europe twice.
Oh, wow.
Because teams wouldn't help me figure it out. Like the first time, like I did all this application stuff for my visa and everything online, and I figured it out, and I thought, hey, everything would get pushed through and like it would be fine. Then come to find out, like a year after staying there, they had not approved it, and I got deported, and so I couldn't come back to Europe for a year. Then I go back, right, and then the team does a back door of getting me my visa, and I figured, hey, it's supposed to be last for a year. Come to find out, it only lasts until October, and I was still in Europe for another year, and I was going to another team, and I go down to Hungary and play, and then I get deported from there. I had to go to Serbia, fly out, right? And then again, I'm trying to figure out the whole navigation of the thing all over again, and that's 2 nights that I had to spend in jail in countries I don't know. Now, don't get me wrong, jail in Denmark is nothing. It's easy.
No, I know.
Super simple. The only thing you don't have
the
only thing you don't have is your cell phone, right? That's it.
Okay.
Outside of that, I had a TV in my room. I had a fridge. All I had to do was ring the bell if I wanted to go to the bathroom, and then you got your food in the morning, which the food sucked. But then when I went to jail in Hungary, they put you in a little ass room by yourself, and it's just the walls that you're looking at. And then they drove me all the way to Serbia and say, hey, you got to figure out a ride from here and then fly home. So like, there's a lot of pieces in there that you're like, damn, if I just would have had the help, like I would think very highly of a lot of places that I spent time at. And
you wouldn't have ended up in jail,
right?
You would have.
That's a little street credit for me. I got a little street credit now. I spent a couple nights overseas in jail. But on top of that,
just because you didn't have money for the hotel.
Yeah. On top of that, though, I'd be like, hey, yeah, you guys for sure should go like play here. But like there's a lot of times where people ask me about certain teams. I'm like, they'll take care of you while you're playing, but if you want to figure out life afterwards, they're not going to help you. And I think that's such a huge part for a lot of us guys, especially when it comes to crossing borders and going overseas, is that a lot of us will enjoy the life over there because we realize how peaceful it is, how much they have the work-life balance figured out. And nobody really kind of helps you with that unless you want to coach and play for the team. If you want to do something outside of that, figure it out on your own. So I think that would be if I look back on my career and the pieces in there that I would try to figure out is think of the player as not just an asset of playing for you, but how much of a person are they and how much do they like want to stay and what are they good at? Because there's so many of us that can do things outside of our sport that we don't get the chance of actually exploring it while we're there, because again, teams just see us as a number. And once you're done being that number, you're gone.
I feel like that's actually a big problem. I mean, I call it a problem. They probably don't, but I feel like that's a big team culture thing, that they have this perception of an athlete as an asset, as a number, but not as a human being. But I do feel like some of the brave, innovative, like a tiny percentage in the world probably, are starting to actually be aware of these things. Like, oh, we forgot this is actually also human beings. So no, we cannot push more games into them. And no, we cannot expect a lot of travel and all these pressure on them. So I feel like it's a really, really tiny crack in the doorway that's starting to open that perception, which I personally hope that there will be much more, because everything starts with the individual, obviously. So for me, it's like the opposite logic. So I never understood that you can reverse that instead of getting the best out of the individual. So hopefully that would be the a new approach. And like you said earlier, Tara, it seems like we have a business model going on here that we probably should go up with.
So I guess that's my question for you, Coop, is that like honestly, like that was quite the tale you told there of the things that happened to you. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm jail. Like, so we did not see that coming. So would you, I guess, a question, like if somebody had a moderate, obviously affordable sort of fee for service to kind of basically, it sounds like a sport concierge, like somebody that's going to help you sort of do that. Because you're right, at university level, they don't do that in Canada. That not to the same extent as I know they do in the US with respect to college. There's like the sitting you down and going, okay, so there's opportunities here for you to take this career path, or there's talent transfer opportunities for you as an athlete. Like, as you know, as I've mentioned, I've been sliding sports for a long time. Happy to pick up football players and people to go and try out sliding sports because you need speed. Or there's other opportunities that are maybe low skill acquisition, like you don't have to do a lot, so you don't have to learn a whole new sport, like how to throw a ball suddenly or something like that. So there's either identify talent transfer opportunities for you into something like sliding sports or other things, or coaching or agency or any type of things where you could do to help leverage those capacities. Would you pay money to somebody to be like, okay, so now I'm going into the pro sector or another type of sport, a national team or whatnot, to kind of help advise me as to, okay, so physical preparation, how would that change? Because like you said, you have a whole new stress load that you've got to be able to carry, and you've got to manage how you're going to train to stay on top. That's a different mindset. How do you train to stay there? Because you already identified earlier that you were tired. By the time you reach there, you're like, I'm done. Like I've made my thing and I'm too tired to do all this. If I just want to enjoy it, well, bam, you got your knees taken out from under you, right? Like all of a sudden that blindsided you. So that you're right. Like you've got to be able to build capacity so that when you do reach this level, you can keep playing at that level, because that's a whole other level of training and preparation that once you get there, how do you manage that? So that's actually got to be factored into training and the training preparation way earlier. So would you have paid for that? I guess my question, would you have paid for that extra support, even a little bit? And in which case, I'm saying call to action. Like, let's do something with that.
23-year-old me, would I have? If it's not somebody that's like me or been in the position that I would wanted to be in or been in that spot, I probably wouldn't have. That's just be thinking about back to my 23-year-old self. Even at like 25, like I wasn't still wasn't trying to hear like what everybody else was saying on the outside, like you should do this, this, and this, like to help you for this part afterwards. Now, if you talk about like a guy that's been in my position that was an undrafted free agent tryout player that got cut and everything like that, he comes in and tells me like, hey, like your road isn't that much different. Like you might make it and then have a little bit more money, right? But there is a point that it does end, and like it comes to me and has the real conversation with me about that stuff. Then yeah, I probably would pay for it, just because that's somebody that I can trust and I can see like that has been through the path and just like keep it brutally honest with me. Like I hate when people kind of come in and like kind of want to pitch an idea, but like kind of give you the runaround and the dream picture of like what it can be. Like tell me like what the bumps in the road were. Tell me like what realistically happened along the way, so I can see the whole picture myself and see the small pieces that took to get to make the big picture. Because it's like for a lot of us, like we only see the big picture, and then we go through those bumps in the road and we're like, shit, like they did tell us this was going to happen, but then like we couldn't see it then. And that's it's almost like we talked about before, the uncle at the barbecue that wanted that said they were going to play, or like it's like parents, like we tell our kids like, hey, this is going to happen if you do this, like, but they don't want to believe us because they're like, well, that was your generation, it's different now. When realistically, it all just repeats itself, right? So if somebody were to come in instead of like, I love it when teams bring in motivational speakers. That's awesome, right? Like when they bring in the army guy or some guy that's like been a motivational speaker and everything like that. But at the end of the day, fuck that. I don't want to hear that. Like bring in a guy that's been in the shoes that I'm in now, that's going to tell me what the step, like what it's going to be like, the honest truth. And I think a lot of athletes now are coming out and talking about like what the honest truth is. But I think there needs to be a lot more that weren't drafted guys, weren't guys that were at a high level or played for many years. There needs to be guys like myself that, or the guys that didn't even make it past like the level that I made it at, that are coming in and telling these guys like what honestly happens. Because there is nobody really sharing that side and being able to form these calls to action to how we can help the next players. And I think that's why it was so important for me to start this part with you two, because I think you guys have such a great perspective on it and are seeing it from every different sport, and being able to transition guys from football to sliding sports, or football to something else, or even in sliding sports to something like all these different people are transitioning. And even I remember when I wanted to transition, there was a point in time that I wanted to try bobsledding, but I was in Florida and I was like, man, I don't know who to talk to. Like all I saw was Cool Runnings and that looked fun. So like, where can I get a piece of that? But nobody really knows, and it's hard for us because we don't, again, we've been burned a lot of times on talking to people, and we don't know who to trust, who to talk to, and who's going to actually lead us down the right path, and like who's asking us for money for actually the right reasons, and who's just asking for it so they can collect a check so they can, feed their own selves.
Well, and I think this is why this could be an incredible platform and invite guests on like that. So we can speak to some of those things like what happens. So here's how we prepare. We could talk about that. We can have some of those guests on, like, or like yourself, that have been burned. And so what did they do and what happened to them and how do we make it better versus and other folks that had a more linear path. Like you said, there's only there's lots and lots and lots of people out there that are wildly capable and they never make it anywhere. And there's people that you probably know people that you played with. You're like, how did that guy make it? You're probably like, how did they make it? Like, I can't even imagine. They were the lowest person in the pack in the beginning, and they're still not that great. Like, so how do they make it? Because that creates a real false reality for people too. And it's extremely debilitating when you're like, if I'm good, if I'm fast, if I do these things well, I will make it. Not necessarily true. There's a lot of people playing in the CFL that you think should be playing in the NFL. And there's people that are playing in the NFL that you're like, how they couldn't make it in some teams in the CFL. It's time and place and chemistry and coaching style and needs and all that stuff that factor into it. And that creates a really false reality for people too, that think if I just do these things, I'm guaranteed to get X. It's not the truth. It's not the truth. You have to have some basic ingredients, and sometimes it's crazy who makes it, who doesn't. It doesn't make sense, and that's very debilitating for people that are on the outside saying, "Well, how in the world am I supposed to expect to succeed then if Bob, who couldn't catch a pass, is making it, and I, who could do all this, is not?" So that reality has to be expected. Like, so that those conversations have to happen. Sometimes wacky things happen, and you've got people playing and make it for a long time who do not have the abilities. So profiling success. What is one of my mentors would say the performance dashboard. What is on your dashboard? Like which, that's part of a job is in my role as a physiologist, is to say, what are the key metrics of success for this sport? Having worked across 30 different sports, probably about 30, I think, probably by now. What are things that make a swimmer successful, a person successful, or this successful? There's a whole bunch of different metrics, and sometimes you get it right and you have all those ingredients in your toolkits, and sometimes you don't. So in which case that screws up the whole model and creates a lot of room for I'm opening the van because I got to drive a bunch of swimmers back, for example, back to town. Watch me as I'm opening the van. So, I think those are some discussions for people to set people up for, as you say, the real truth. Sometimes you don't make it, you can do everything right, but then what are some of the things you can take away from that? And where's the accountability? When some people are treated like garbage or have a terrible experience, like who needs to take the hit for that? Who needs to take responsibility for that? And I think that's another discussion, is who should it fall to? And in which case, what are the next steps? Do you go to appeal to the NFL or the CFL and say, all right, like this is really, really important. Here's the carnage that happens to athletes that don't make it, or after they retire and are living on the street, or have some terrible thing wrong with them that no one took responsibility for. Like, who should be liable for that? And in which case, how do we prevent that? The carnage, the aftermath, so that people can be healthy, well, safe, productive, and not a huge burden on the healthcare system. I don't know. I have lots to say about this. You could probably keep me here till tomorrow morning and I probably wouldn't be done talking about it. So In which case, I do have to go and drive a bunch of simmers
It
back
looks
to.
like it.
It's all good. We'll get back to it next week, guys. I appreciate all y'all's time. A lot more to talk about on this whole subject on how do we get teams to help people plan for after retirement. But we're out of here.
Okay,
Thank
thank you
you.
guys. Have a
Thank you.
wonderful